Hello. We're continuing on in 2 Kings today. We're in chapters 16, 17, and 18. And this is kind of a big pivotal moment. Chapter 17 is because we know that God foretold that the tribes of Israel were going to be destroyed, completely wiped out because of what Jeroboam did. And this is when that is going to happen. We start off in chapter 16 with Ahaz, a king of Judah. And like one more time, starting down somewhere around verse 2, I think it is, says he said, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord his God. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, and even sacrificed his son. Lost my place. Sacrificed his son in the fire, following the detestable ways of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. Remember, the Lord has referred to as those nations, the Canaanite nations, as their detestable ways. Well, one of those things was child sacrifice, and it says here that even a king of Israel offered his child as a sacrifice. We're going to see that more later on. You also see the name Tiglath-Pileser again of Assyria, and he's trying to make peace with him because he's seen what's going on up in Israel. And so anyway, when you get towards in chapter 17, you see Hoshea, the last king of Israel, and look, he's just really tough. It says that he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, but not like the kings of Israel who preceded him. In other words, he was even worse. And we've seen that phrase 2 or 3 times before. Not like the ones before. He was worse than the ones before. And this is the very last one, Hoshea, the king of Israel. I want you to see a couple of passages that I think are very good. 17 verse 7. All of this took place because the Israelites had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of Egypt from under the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. They worshipped other gods and followed the practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before them, as well as the practices that the kings of Israel had introduced. It says the Israelites secretly did things against the Lord their God that were not right. In other words, they're doing things out in public, they're doing things in private. They did this, and this happened to them because of the fact that they had stopped following Jehovah pretty much completely. Verse 14, but they would not listen and were as stiff-necked as their fathers, who did not trust in the Lord their God. See, following God is just trusting that he will actually do what he says he will do, that he has the ability to do what he says he will do. That's what faith is. And they just did not believe that, even though they had all these illustrations, they've seen it. It says they followed worthless idols and themselves became worthless. You see, when you follow an idol, not only is the idol that you're following worthless, but you take on the characteristics of that idol. You too become worthless. It says, verse 17, they sacrificed their sons and daughters in the fire. They practiced divination and sorcery and sold themselves to do evil in the eyes of the Lord, provoking him to anger. Chapter 17. And then there's more in there. One thing that's interesting in verse 24, it says the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Kuta, Ava, Hamath, Shepharim, and settled them in the towns of Samaria. Now, I want you to look at a couple of things here. Down in verse 26, it says, the people you deported and resettled, this is talking to the king of Assyria, in the towns of Samaria, do not know what the God of that country requires. He has sent lions among them, which are killing them off, because the people do not know what he requires. Then the king of Assyria gave this order: have one of the priests you took captive from Samaria go back to live there and teach the people what the God of the land requires. And they did that. Remember, in Jesus' day, the good Jews, like the Pharisees, would not even walk through the land of Samaria, even though they were their cousins, because they had been so interspersed with the people of other nations. Even though they tried to come back and follow a little bit, just a little bit, what God told him to do, they did not follow it completely. Remember Jesus and the woman at the well. She's from Samaria. Anyway, I think that's really interesting to see all of that. And you'll see more passages in there that you'll enjoy, I think, in chapter 17. But that's the last we hear of Israel as a nation. They go into captivity and never come back. Then you pick up in chapter 18, and you have the introduction of Hezekiah, king of Judah. And Hezekiah is clearly one of the best kings that they have. We're going to see a couple of good kings here over the next few times. But you see, Hezekiah, it says that he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. And then he describes why. It says he removed the high places, smashed the sacred stones, cut down the Asherah poles, broke into pieces the bronze snake that Moses had made. Now that's kind of interesting. That's something that God had done. Remember in the wilderness wandering, they set up the snake because the people had sinned, and they went to that snake and they were healed of the plague, or of the bites of the vipers. And the people had started worshiping it. And so Hezekiah even breaks that down. And then it says, Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among the kings of Judah, either before him or after him. He held fast to the Lord, and he did not cease to follow him. He kept his commands. So here we have good King Hezekiah. We see that Sennacherib threatens them, and Sennacherib is the king of Assyria. And you see Isaiah brought in for the first time, because Hezekiah sends to Isaiah and asks for what the Lord's going to do, and Isaiah's response is that the Lord is going to protect him. And that pretty much takes us through to the end of chapter 18. We'll pick up more with Hezekiah tomorrow. Hope you enjoy the readings, and I will talk to you again tomorrow. Have a great evening.